This is Colleen's Cold War Podcast, episode 2, and I have Logan here with me.
This is Logan, hello.
And today we're going to be going more in depth about the power struggles and this competition amongst some of the world's greatest superpowers between the USSR, the Soviet Union, China, the US, and how that affected the things that were going on in these countries and some of those major pivotal moments that shaped the Cold War. So, the Berlin airlift was the first battle of the Cold War, and I think, it said a lot that, there was this big blockade, with these airlifts. They were trying not to stop people from, moving. They were trying to, it was almost like a containment of an Air Force base.
Yeah, that was really interesting. They were blocking trade and blocking people from getting in and out of, the area. And they also had, similar things set up, on the ground. It wasn't only, through air, even though it says, it's called the airlift.
I think they were, I don't think it necessarily worked because it caused tensions between Berlin and, the United States and, and they were just trying to protect themselves from the Soviet Union, really.
Yeah.
I think everybody just kind of, didn't want to mess with the Soviet Union. China was bad, these other countries, you weren't getting along with them. But then, I think everybody had a mutual dislike for the Soviet Union.
Yeah, everyone that was outside of their faction was a little, kind of scared, I guess. And I want to say.
I would agree.
Yeah, and I would almost say it's, I want to say similar, but, almost in a different way for, the U.S. I think that kind of comes with, being a world power as well, too. If someone's not with you and you're a world power, you're probably a bit terrifying. It's
you're either with me or stand beside me or we're enemies.
Yeah, especially because of that concept, yeah.
And I think, it was I think it's scary. I mean, thinking as a nation, you want to be on top. Because if you're not on top, where are you,
You're in trouble.
Yeah, because it's you don't want to be, it's, there's these stories about being the underdog. But in this case, you don't want to be the country that doesn't have the weapons. You don't want to be the country that's not prepared to, for this, massive scale war. You don't want to be that person,
But then you almost wonder, do you want to be at world power? Because we think about all of these fallen empires, and we see that after so much time all of these great empires have fallen. And I don't know,
I think
it's just interesting.
It is interesting to think, they all, it seemed like there was always this pivotal moment or change that caused them to fall. And thinking of in relation to those empires falling in the United States, we really haven't had we've had the wars, but it's not been a major where our country's going to crumble.
Yeah.
In the Cold War, we were overly ambitious. We were nuclear weapons. We're on top of it. Let's go over. We're gonna take this thing on. We're gonna get up close and personal with these other countries.
Yeah, we engaged in a lot of proxy wars, and they did too. And I think the problem was that at the time, our economy was going through a really strong point. And theirs was kind of doing the opposite.
And I think us, with this Cold War, we kind of, hurt. There's like even like they were already not great, but we kind of even further like perpetuated that economic decline.
Yeah, and then there are some occasions where they didn't really help themselves, where they did things that weren't necessarily like the greatest, like deregulation on like some industries, which caused like Chernobyl, and like that even, also caused like a lot of civil unrest, which is again not great for the economy.
And even with like the Berlin aircraft, going back to that, like the Soviet Union, they were kind of like humiliated about that. Like they were, that had kind of like failed. Like it was like like you have to win. There was no other option for these countries but to win, because what was the consequence?
Then
communism takes over the world.
Yeah.
And I think like the Berlin Wall, the falling of it, it was a peaceful revolution, and it was splitting the two countries, but there's that huge split even without a physical wall, between all countries really.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's interesting to think about how like we separate ourselves so much from the Soviet Union and from like China and from these other countries.
Yeah, and I think it's a really interesting concept to look at like the difference between like countries in like America and then like countries specifically in like Eastern Europe. Well, most of Europe really, the European Union in total, they have like an open borders policy with each other where like you don't really know really when you're going over a border, you're just kind of going over a border.
Yeah, it's kind of, for me, sounds like, like a county line, there's a little tiny sign, but then, you try to go into Canada and they're like, get out of the car, like we're going to look for like your Kinder Surprise eggs. Yeah.
I was born in Germany, and so we went back there this summer, and I was staying at my grandma's, who like lives in like a smaller town on like the border of Germany and like the Czech Republic. And there were like several times where I just like casually like walked into the Czech Republic.
You're like
not even knowing on accident.
You're like, what's this place? You're like, whoa.
Yeah.
let me take a foot. Let me walk back over to that plant over there.
Yeah. And then like we just drove to the Netherlands, and like randomly like was in the Netherlands. I didn't even realize until like the language was different.
you're like, where are we now?
Yeah.
But like here, that would never happen. That would never happen.
Crazy.
Because we're and like we talked about like in the last like episode, like we're so isolated.
Yeah, we're isolationists. It's weird.
I think it's kind of like a North America sort of thing, because other countries really aren't like. We're really the only people that are like particular about who's coming in and who's coming out.
Yeah, and like obviously like Russia is like that currently because it's war times, and like there's probably not open borders in Ukraine either, if I had to imagine.
No, I wouldn't think people want to be crossing into Ukraine accidentally.
Yeah, probably not. And and the UK just did like an exit from the EU, and so they're like kind of isolated, but it's still like pretty free travel, I would say, between those countries. But then you do see them isolate themselves from like other countries like Turkey, like Middle Eastern countries, and like.
And I think those countries were the ones that were really heavily, like not the big like three players in like the Cold War, but they were kind of essential and kind of like the backbone and like support for some of these these communist countries.
Yeah, there was a lot of battle over like things in the Middle East too, and really all over. Like it's kind of interesting. The Cold War, it was like a worldwide war, but not. It was just like decentralized almost, even though it was being fought by like governments.
I agree, and I think it's just really hard to to think about how this all kind of like how did we get to this place?
Yeah, it's
that we're all fearful. We're all on this like same like we're all on the same like planet. Thousands of miles away, but that like barrier between us is so distinct.
Yeah, it's interesting because ultimately like you'd think all humans like probably have like the same general goals, like, and like as a society I think we generally like want to see society move forward, and like we want to see like the general population do well, and like it's just really different ideas of like how to do that, and to see how that creates such a split between governments and societies just because of that difference.
And I think like seeing that difference in government styles and how they rule them, you know, like with like the Bay of Pigs invasion, I mean, you know, these Cuban exiles, you know, it was like this failed military attempt. And, you know, but that was kind of when Cuba, you know, was really adopting this socialist society, you know, and we're here in the United States and we're reassessing Cuba. We're thinking, you know, Cuba's not, you know, Fidel Castro. Yeah, but now we're like, you know, maybe we need to be a little bit more weary of Cuba over here, you know?
Yeah, like we had done like multiple kind of invasion attempts on Cuba, and then they kind of in response got, you know, missiles from Russia, and I don't know if the intention was obviously like mutually assured destruction in the same way Russia was doing it, or like people seem to act like their intention was to attack, although I think it was probably mutually assured destruction like how it was with Russia.
No, I would definitely agree, and I think you know, we just really wanted to like end, you know, the United States was so dead set on like almost like eliminating communism at all costs.
Yeah, they just wanted to put a cap in it. They were like, all right, we just want,
you know, and that's why, you know, like, and like they tried multiple times, you know, to overthrow like communist governments in other countries, you know, like looking at Cuba, you know, the Bay of Pigs invasion, the Cuban Missile Crisis, you know. So a lot of that stuff, there was a lot of stuff that wasn't successful, and it was because, you know, these communist countries, you know, they did have a lot of power, even though they were like this totalitarian, you know, socialist society. They had a lot of following.
Yeah, and I also think it's interesting to look at like the rate at which we did these kind of like coups and like insurgencies to like prevent these like left-wing governments, because of like,
because I mean the Cold War lasted a long time. I mean, like thinking about the span of time that these things were raging from, you know, 9 U.S. presidents were in turn, you know, over the Cold War. I mean, from Truman, you know, to like, I think Kennedy was the last. I think it was even past Kennedy. Maybe it was Reagan. But I mean, Reagan was president in the 80s. I mean, 40 years of like unrest and like.
I think he might have even. Was he even president maybe until like early 90s? No, I don't think.
I think he might have like been like at the end of it. But, you know, it's just crazy to think that, you know, there could be so much unrest and like political like and like social, I would even say, like fear for such an extended amount of time. Because, you know, and I think that, you know, we feel that this is like kind of isolated to like these events, but I don't think we really realized how, you know, because I think when we think of like the 80s and the 70s, you know, we think of these big like cultural like movements, but, you know, that was all kind of started by the Cold War.
Yeah, it was started by like there was this big push against like war because of Vietnam, this big anti-imperialist movement. There was big environmental movements because of like the rate at which production was happening in order to like try to compete
with these other countries.
Yeah, and it's like almost the government, like when the government tries so hard to almost not exactly suppress these ideas, but try to like
outdo them?
Try to play the game of like we're the best, this is the way to do it, and we're going to show you, it goes wrong because, like, you know.
And we saw that, you know, like, that sort of, like, competition kind of is what, you know, shaped the Cold War, you know, and I think looking at, like, the moon race even, you know, it was, you know, who had the best intellect, who had the best, like, science, you know, it was who could do what better. But the thing is, they were also doing who could do it faster, you know, who could take that extra step, you know. It wasn't enough to get, you know, an animal into space. Okay, well, now you got to send a man into space. Okay, now you got to send 3 men. Okay, well, now someone has to orbit the moon, you know. Now someone has to touch the moon. And it's, you know, this constant fight. And that's not good for countries to be in that it's kind of like a sibling rivalry, you know.
Yeah, and it is. And it's like a sibling rivalry that almost still, like
toxic siblings.
Yeah, it, like, almost extends outside of, like, I want to say the boundaries of, like, just, like, the countries doing it. Because, like, even today, well, like, I don't know how far this dates back, but you can see, like, if you saw, like, a map of the South American countries that we've done, like, coups in, it's, like, all of them.
we're just like, we want to go everywhere.
Yeah, we're just like, look, guys, we know you got these ideas, but they're a little too close to home.
We're like, no. We're like, you know,
yeah.
You know, like, keep it, you know, keep it to yourselves, you know.
Yeah.
We really don't want anything to get into our borders, you know.
And it's not to say one is better than the other, but it's really just to say, like, are we really better at all? Because we're doing the same thing. And
I feel like there's really not a right I mean, like, there's no right or, I mean, because, you know, I think, you know, while, like, some, like, you know, governments are seen as, like, you know, dictatorships, you know, communism seen as, like, the worst, you know, what's to say that, you know, that there's not something out there that could be even worse.
Yeah, and I think the interesting thing about politics is there's really no one way to do it. Because when you're trying to achieve, like, a prosperous society, like, there's not necessarily, like, one way to do it, and it depends on, like, what the people want, because you need to make the people happy for a prosperous society, and so everyone has these different ideas, but ultimately we all have the same goals.
And everybody just kind of wants to be that, like, superior, you know, that superior power, you know, and to have that, you know, to be able to say they're the best, you know, like, like, we're the best.
My way is the good way.
Like my way, the highway, you know, like, you know, follow or, you know, get left behind, you know.
Exactly.
And I think, you know, with, like, the 1980 and the 1984 Olympics, you know, they were heavily, you know, boycotted because of the Soviets' invasion of Afghanistan. And, you know, there were 65 nations that didn't go to those Olympics, you know, and didn't send their people there because they didn't want to support that. But then we look at it and, you know, we see these countries supporting the United States still today when we're heavily in the Middle East, in Afghanistan, you know. You know, and it's, you know, different time periods, like, change those things. And I think, you know, the thing that changed it for, like, the difference between the Soviet Union being in Afghanistan and us being there, we had 9/11, you know, like the Cold War, you know, it kind of, like, sparked this, you know, huge change.
It gave us almost an excuse to do it. And I think something that helps us as well is we're kind of, we're rooted so far in, like, so many countries, not in terms of, like, even the coups that, like, I was talking about, but, like, just in terms of, like, mutual, like, development and, like,
we all kind of, like, helped each other.
Yeah, like, we have a lot of influence over, like,
other cultures,
NATO in general, and like a lot of other countries, and we have, like, our military everywhere around the world.
Yeah, I mean, like, we have military bases, Germany, Afghanistan,
That's how I was conceived.
Everywhere in the United States. I mean, like, really, we're everywhere. But, I look at it and I'm like, but are these other countries everywhere? I don't, we see people that have, like, moved from other countries to here, but we don't see these powers. We don't see a piece of the of the Afghanistan government here. That would be completely unheard of. Yet we have so many people in Afghanistan, and all over.
I almost wonder, like, what the goal is after all of this, because I feel like it's almost just common sense that when you go into somewhere and you start to, like, become the oppressor, like, you're not gonna be well liked. And I don't know what the end goal is for, like, these countries, but, like, the people of these countries are, like, they're bound not to, like,
they don't want to be there anymore.
Yeah, be there anymore. And if they do want to be there, they're bound to be, like, anti-U.S. So no matter, like, how many, like, pro-U.S. governments you install, you're probably going to have, like, a vicious cycle of, like...
And I think it's kind of like, I think it all kind of, like, it is, and kind of going back to what we said in the last episode, going back to that domino effect, like, it all just kind of, like, trickles down. We saw in the U.S., when, like, settlers were moving around, we really, like, were horrible to the Native Americans, and we wanted to, spread this American idealism, and, we're still doing that in other countries. We look at other countries and we see how different they are from ours, and we just think that there's something wrong.
Yeah, I think that we do a lot more nationalism than we care to admit, which isn't a great thing.
But, like, people don't really, like, talk about... the Cold War, that was such a huge topic that, that was what was going on. And then it's like, after the Cold War, okay, now we got other fish to fry,
Yeah, and I think it's because... I don't want to say, like, the U.S. per se has this, like, monopoly on media, but, like, it kind of does.
It's probably why we're all scared of TikTok,
Yeah, like, you see, like, most... I don't want to say most media, but, like, there's a lot of American media consumed in, like, other countries, and, like, not the same back.
It's not reciprocated.
Like, yeah, like...
Like, I'm not seeing, like, news about what's going on in China, what's going on in France, what's going on down in Cuba, North Korea.
Yeah.
We're not seeing that here. But are they seeing... So, I don't know people from those countries. You think they are seeing our news and stuff?
I know, at least from, like, personal examples, which is kind of anecdotal, that, like, like, my aunt and grandma and stuff, like, will see news on, like, stuff going on in the U.S. occasionally, and, like, they'll, like, text my mom and be like, what is going on over there? Like,
you're like, how do you know about that?
Yeah, and also just, like, really just, like, movies or anything, songs, just, like, any kinds of media, a lot of it is exported from the United States.
Yeah.
And, like, really the only kinds of media, I think, come from other countries that we get. It's, like, occasionally music, like, we see some, like, K-pop in the U.S., and then, like
anime sort of stuff.
Yeah, like, anime, like, we see some culture breakthrough there, but, like, other than that, it's, like, we're the main exporter of, like, all of that stuff.
And I would say even for some of, like, that music, it's kind of rooted in the U.S. now. Like, they're not...
They're appealing to popular culture in the U.S. a lot.
It's like everything is designed to appeal to the U.S., not necessarily other countries.
Because, yeah, it's like a weird mix of, like, nationalism and consumerism all together.
And I think it's this, like, balancing act, of power, of, like, it really is a big power, like, imbalance, like, who's it for and what, why.
Yeah.
But we're gonna end it at that. So
We are gonna
we'll see you next time. So have a great rest of y'all's night.